Hello and welcome back to the F2 show. I'm your host Fraser Ford, and joining me today we have an all Inside F2 lineup. We have Inside F2 editor Hannah Briffick, and we also have Inside F2 writers Jenny Craig and Lawrence Griffin. Coming up on today's show, another exciting weekend of action in Formula 2. We'll be discussing all of the talking points from Silverstone. We have a new championship leader. We'll be assessing how round 4's results impact on the championship standings. And finally, we'll be answering all of your questions off the back of this weekend. Let's get stuck into it then, Hannah. Not necessarily the most action-packed weekends like we're kind of used to from Formula 2, but a huge weekend in terms of the championship nonetheless.
Absolutely. I think especially if you're Oscar Piastri, you're going to be coming out of this weekend with a pretty big smile on your face. And I think for him and for a lot of the drivers, maybe a quiet weekend was actually what they needed. I think Silverstone will be memorable in multiple ways, maybe less so because of the on-track action, but the impact it's had on that championship battle. I think it's streamlined it in terms of who are the main contenders, but also it's just made it even tighter, and I can't wait to see what happens in Monza.
Yeah, really tight at the top, isn't it? And Jenny, great to have you back with us. Is this a turning point in the championship? Obviously, a change of lead. Is that going to be, the way things are going to go moving forward?
Yeah, Promos seem a lot stronger than they were towards the start of the season. But I think maybe because of the feature race today, I think Zhou might be starting to pull it back because he was really unlucky. Like, I think it was the last 4 races before the feature race, he didn't score. So he might have got the momentum back he needed.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll wait and see. And Lawrence, great to have you with us for the first time. Fans back at the British Grand Prix. How good was that to see?
That was wonderful. It really does. It does put a smile on your face just to see fans back in the crowds. This is what we've all been missing, I think, for so long. And I was very impressed with the turnout for the first sprint race as well. At 8:50 on a Saturday morning, there was a great crowd out. So love to see everybody enjoying F2 as much as we are.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to see. So let's take a look at the championship standings after this weekend then. Oscar Piastri is our new championship leader, following on from another consistent weekend. The Aussie moves 5 points clear ahead of UNI Virtuosi's Guanyu Zhou. Another win for Robert Schwartzman this weekend. He moves into 3rd in the championship, just 2 points ahead of Brit Dan Ticktum. And Yuri Vips rounds up the top 5. He moves 20 points clear ahead of Théo Pourchaire. And the team standings, Prema extend their lead at the top of the standings to 37 points over UNI Virtuosi to lead both the drivers and the team standings. Carlin moved 2 points ahead of High Tech, with ART rounding out the top 5. Of course, as always, if you want to see the full race results and the full standings, you can head over to our website, www.insidef2.com, and they are all on there. Let's talk about the championship leader then, Oscar Piastri, the new championship leader, Oscar Piastri. Another consistent weekend, only on the podium once this weekend, obviously in a feature race, but 2 important points finishes in both sprint races, Hannah, a 6th and a 4th. He's doing everything he needs to do right now, isn't he?
Absolutely. I think for Oscar, he's become maybe more of a complete driver than we've seen. I know previously, especially during his Formula 3 campaign, he hasn't had a pole position since round 7 in Hungary of the 2019 Formula Renault Euro Cup. It's been a long time coming. And this weekend, I think he's shown both the outright pace and, I hate to say the phrase, but common sense. He knows, I think it was clearly demonstrated in his battles with Liam Lawson in the first and second sprint races, was he knew when he needed to take the risks and sometimes when it's best to pull back. And I think in terms of the championship potential, he's shown that despite being a rookie, he seems to have a very good grasp on that car. As Jenny said, the Premas have been in fine form this season, and I think it was clearly shown at Silverstone, a track where they previously struggled. He's come out there, yes, hasn't set the world light. I was a bit disappointed that he didn't have the pace to take the victory in the feature race, but overall for him, he knows that consistency is key, and I think it's very interesting maybe to compare him to Zhou, because Zhou's had a very up and down season, and it's shown in the fact that he's lost the title lead. And for Oscar, he's going to be heading into the mid-season break thinking, I've got a genuine shot at this now. I just need to keep my head down and have an incident-free 4 rounds.
Yeah, it was a real I think he showed quite a bit of maturity this weekend, which was really obviously refreshing to see, and a lot more consistent, as you said, than Guanyu Zhou. He did struggle to get past Matteo Nannini in the feature race, which did ruin his feature race a little bit. Well, his hopes of the win, definitely, Jenny. Well, do you think that, why do you think he struggled against Matteo Nannini to get past him?
I don't know, because he was really quick in his first stint, but he just seemed to lose quite a bit of pace in his second. But I think, like Hannah said, with him being more of a complete driver, I think he's really got the grip on how to do this weekend format, because he's scoring points pretty much every race, and it's not like 9th or 10th or 8th. He's getting quite high points, and I think he's doing exactly what he needs to be doing.
Yeah, we saw obviously last season Mick Schumacher winning the title through that consistency, not necessarily the most wins of last season, but that consistency really shone through, didn't it? And Lawrence, obviously a brilliant battle between him and Richard Verschoor, who we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail later on in the podcast. But Piastri was all 4 wheels off the track at one point. Was that just good hard racing, or do you think he was a little bit lucky and got away with that one there?
Well, he was certainly all 4 wheels off the track. I think it was just a case of brilliant racing. I mean, these are the sort of battles that we really love to see. Verschoor being spurred on by his team over team radio, and then sending it on the penultimate lap. So I think it was a wonderful battle. I think Verschoor himself had been pushed a bit wide by Piastri in the previous corner as well. I think it's just both cases of drivers on the outside with nowhere to really go. Verschoor had to correct for a moment of oversteer going into the second corner, which pushed Piastri slightly wide. I don't really know what else he could have done in that situation. I think you could argue, could he have come back on the track and made an effort not to take the position as he'd been off the track? But I just don't think that's how these drivers are wired, and I don't think we want to have them any other way. There's no question you're going to go full throttle whether you're on the track or off it to try and take that position. So I think it's good that one was left alone, and that we get to see more and more of that sort of hard racing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we absolutely love the wheel-to-wheel battles, and we want to see more of them, not less. And I suppose penalising Oscar Piastri in that situation would be discouraging the drivers, if you like, from that wheel-to-wheel action. And the guy that Oscar Piastri replaced at the top of the standings this weekend, Guanyu Zhou, how would you assess his weekend, Hannah? He won the feature race, which I'm sure he'll be delighted about, but he did lose the championship lead this weekend.
I think overall, Zhou will be leaving the weekend probably happier after the feature race than he would have done after the 2 sprint races. It was a definite dominant showing for him. I think it showed that when he has the pace, he has it in spades. But when he doesn't, and with both of the sprint races, it just highlighted maybe some of the weaknesses that he'd had. I think obviously it is unfortunate, given the reverse grid format, he was taken out, and I think it would have left a lot of maybe frustration for him, because he knows, I mean, he was Callum Ilot's teammate last year, and he saw the fact that Callum lost the championship lead and eventually the championship as a whole because he didn't have that consistency across all the weekends. And with the new format, it has made it probably harder for the front runners to mount a consistent title campaign. I think the thing that probably for him maybe adds a bit of salt in the wound is not just that he lost the championship lead, but he's lost it to Piastri, the guy at the Alpine Academy that a lot of people are favouring for an F1 seat, possibly instead of Zhou or alongside him in the future. And I think that'll probably boil a little bit, maybe niggle him a little bit, but he knows it's the halfway point in the season. We've seen things change so quickly in Formula 2, even so far this year. So I think he'll want to reset during the break and come back fighting in Monza, because I think Silverstone wasn't his best, but maybe highlights the areas he needs to work on.
Yeah, it's obviously a big weekend in terms of the championship. Are we seeing similarities in Guanyu Zhou's season compared to Callum Ilott, his teammate last season, and Robert Schwartzman as well? They both had races where they weren't necessarily, they weren't there or thereabouts, and they did have off races. They did make a few mistakes. Are we seeing similarities with that, Hannah?
I think completely. For me, it feels bad to say, but it does seem like this kind of different side of the same coin for both of them. I think Schwartzman as well, even this year, has had up and down races, but seems to still sometimes find that consistency and move up, whereas Zhou sometimes, I think, has had it where he's been in a difficult position and hasn't had the pace to be able to move forward. I think probably maybe the second sprint race highlighted that. He's outside the points. He although he moved up some, he wasn't able to push it as far, whether that being Silverstone probably didn't help matters. I know a lot of the drivers remarked that there were difficulties in overtaking there. And I think it does maybe prove this year more than ever, it's just how competitive Formula 2 is. You can't afford to be having an off 2 races. I think it's now his 5th failure to score so far this season after 2 sprint races. And for him, those handful of points can make all the difference. So I think for him, he maybe needs to, I don't know what I'd recommend, to be honest, for him. I think it's one of the things if he just needs to maybe look at maximising those opportunities more when they're there. And maybe sometimes playing it a little bit more conservative. I think he's a racing driver. He wants to push it to the front, but maybe sometimes when you're starting in the midfield, a little bit of caution, maybe a little bit more awareness could help. So I would say for him, it's going to be interesting to see whether those non-point scoring finishes end up biting him in the back for the rest of the year.
It's sometimes in Formula 2, it's not necessarily the wins and the great performances, is sometimes the races where you don't score points, regularly, that kind of separates you from being in title contention and not, right? So fingers crossed he can turn that round for the rest of the season. And you've mentioned Robert Schwartzman in there, obviously our first race winner of the weekend after a little bit of a disappointing qualifying, actually, which coincidentally made him made his race in sprint race 1. A decent race in a feature race. What did you make of this weekend, Lawrence?
I think it was certainly another mixed weekend, I'd probably say, for Robert Schwartzman. He came into the weekend 12 points behind Guanyu Zhou and leaves 17 points behind Oscar Piastri. So it's a little bit one step forward, one step backwards for him. But he should be really encouraged by his sprint race victory in the first sprint race, where he had those 3 safety car restarts, all of which he dealt with brilliantly, really quickly building a comfortable gap to Yuri Vips behind. And he did also have a solid performance in the feature race, like you say, on the back of a slightly disappointing qualifying session. Of course, that sprint race spin that he had in the second sprint race that dropped him well out of the top 10 is not ideal, and he does, I think, need to work on that consistency, something that we've already spoken about in terms of how well Oscar Piastri has been doing that and how well he's been doing in that department recently. So I think if he can find that consistency, we know the potential of Robert Schwartzman. I think once he finds that, he can be a really good title challenger, but there's so much left still to play for. We're only halfway through the season.
We are only halfway through the season indeed, so there is a lot to play for, as you say. Jenny, Lawrence has just touched on that spin. Was he lucky that he wasn't in the points? Because if he was in the points and he'd spun and lost those points, then, that would have been, not great for his championship hopes, would it?
No, that would have been quite bad. I think he does make quite a few mistakes, but then he's lucky because he'll do them when he's not in a high position. So it's good, but then it's not really that good because he's still losing out, and he might have gone because was he behind quite a few people when he did that? I think he was in a battle. I don't know. I think so.
He was in a group, yeah.
Yeah, so he might have missed a chance to go forward. But he didn't lose any points, which is a good thing, but he didn't make any either.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. I'm sure he'll want to, cut down on those mistakes if he's to be a title contender. And Hannah, obviously, those little mistakes, a lot, same with Robert Schwartzman and Guanyu Zhou, those little mistakes, are they going to have to cut them out if they're seriously to be considered for Formula One next season?
I think, to be honest, of all the things that the drivers need to do this year, cutting out those kinds of mistakes, I think in Formula 2, they're costly. Imagine doing that in a £1 million Formula 1 car. I think it would end up probably not doing too well for them. And I think it maybe shows, ironically, for 2 of the drivers that are probably more experienced compared to, say, some of the rookies in the championship, it maybe highlights some of the areas that they still need to work on and they still need to learn, and a level of maybe inexperience. I think Schwartzman's one was a little bit unfortunate, and I think being at Silverstone didn't help. A lot of the drivers said about difficulties in getting grip throughout the weekend, and he was at that point where it was critical tyre temperatures, clips the curb whilst trying to chase down another car, and unfortunately it does end badly. And I think for a lot of them, it just maybe shows that this is why it's a feeder series to Formula One. This is the opportunities that they get. This is maybe the school of driving for a lot of them, it will teach them valuable assets and valuable skills that they need to make it in Formula One. But it also maybe highlights for maybe some of the Formula One teams, the drivers that are good, the drivers that are great, and the drivers that are future world champions. And I think Schwartzman is in a difficult position given the competitiveness of the Ferrari Driver Academy and the seats available in the championship. And he knows he needs to win it if he wants to get into Formula One, and he can't have mistakes like this. I don't want to say it's sloppiness because that feels bad to say, but it's those little niggling things that ultimately do damage a campaign. And maybe even if he wins, it'll be the things that go wrong that stick in teams' mind, not necessarily the things that have gone well.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it is the feeder series, so it's better to make those mistakes out of the spotlight, isn't it? So fingers crossed they will learn from those things and yeah, push on for the rest of the season. Now, Richard Verschoor, what a weekend he's had. Jenny, I know you're a big fan. Sum up his weekend for us.
I can't believe he's not in a driver academy though. Like, he's done so well for quite a few years now, and no one's picked him up yet. But I think he needed it as well because he's not there for the whole season. Well, not announced for the whole season. So I think MP might be looking at that. At least I hope they are.
Yeah, I think we all hope that because he's had a brilliant start to the season. And Lawrence, you know, he can't do anything more than what he's done, has he? You know, particularly this weekend, he's had a brilliant weekend. He's picked up his first win. He can't do much more than that. Surely MP are impressed, and surely his sponsors are going to want to stick around, no?
Absolutely. I really don't see how much more he could do, especially I think what was really impressive was his qualifying session. That wasn't taking advantage of any reverse grid position that he found himself in. That was pure pace, and he did really brilliantly. He's only 20 years old. He has a bright future ahead of him, and he's been outperforming his teammates and Ellie as well. So if I was MP Motorsport, I don't know what I could possibly be looking for him to do better at this point. I don't see why you would take the risk of going for somebody else after he's been performing so well. So I think performances like he's done this weekend will do the talking for him, and I hope he gets his just desserts.
As Jenny's just said, you know, no driver academy for Richard Verschoor. Do you think a few driver academies will be looking at him after the start of the season he's had?
Absolutely, I think he really would, with that potential that he has, and how well he's performing for MP Motorsport, a team that hasn't been up at the front recently in the same way that the likes of Carlin and UNI Virtuosi and Prema have been. So I think he would certainly be worth a gamble, if nothing else.
He used to be part of the Red Bull Academy, if I'm right. You know, we know what Red Bull's history like. Maybe they'll take him back. Who knows? And Dan Ticktum, Hannah, the only man to stand on the podium twice this weekend, in the points for all three races as well. We've spoken about the consistency of Oscar Piastri, but Dan Ticktum, he has to be put in the same bracket, no?
I would say so. I think Ticktum, Piastri and Verschoor were the three most impressive drivers this weekend. And I think Dan's probably had maybe the biggest character arc on the grid. Obviously, maybe showed a lot of promise in his first campaign, but didn't always have that level of consistency. And I think probably being at Carlin does help. I think we've seen Carlin obviously they took Yuki Tsunoda to F1 this time around. We've seen them build up champions across multiple feeder series. And for him, that atmosphere seems to have done him a world of good. I think I don't think motivation, but you can just tell there's a different aura about him. He's confident. He knows that he can perform well when the car's there. And I think this weekend showed it. And I think it also showed in the fact that when it maybe didn't go to plan, he was able to move on from it. Possibly, I think the format might help having those long breaks in between the races. But he had two very solid performances. Obviously, the 8th place in sprint race 1, I think, was a difficult situation for all of the drivers because it was just a long DRS train. And I think that is the frustration that I've had from the whole weekend, is there was just the difficulty in getting those overtaking manoeuvres put in. And it wasn't necessarily the driver's fault. It's just sometimes how Silverstone is, which sounds weird because I was maybe anticipating a lot more overtakes than there were, given that it's a larger track. But then having that 3rd place in sprint race 2 and the 2nd place today he couldn't have probably performed better given the pace in the car. I think I have to tip my hat off to him, is his starts. That's the thing that's, to be honest, most impressed me, is he's had these blinding starts, and him and Guanyu Zhou have had probably the most difficult situation with that. Is they've basically had, after Zhou's incident in Baku, part of the clutches changed. I think, I'm hoping I get this technically right, but part of the clutches changed for the drivers. They had very limited opportunities to do it, kind of rehearse it in practice. And they've gone into this weekend knowing that, to be honest, they could end up having a stall on the grid. And yes, his start in sprint race 1 wasn't great, but it wasn't awful. And then in sprint race 2 and in the feature race, he shot off like a bullet. And I think for him that's one of the crucial aspects, especially in tracks where, say, for example, this time around, there's been limited overtaking opportunities. Ticktum's taken those opportunities when he found them. The fact that he was able to get past Piastri and then hold him, given the tyre degradation that we all saw on track. And for him, he's going to be leaving this weekend on a very positive note. I think the thing that kind of warmed my heart a little bit was him on the radio and on the podium, just seeing how much it meant to him to get on the podium at the home race. And for him, he'll be leaving Silverstone with probably an even bigger grin than he had up there.
Hannah Pruffick, our Inside F2 tech insight there. So thanks for that, Hannah. Hey, very, very true, though. I think he will be leaving Silverstone very happy. Christian Lundgaard cannot catch a break this season, can he? It was so nice seeing him on the podium in sprint race 1. And I thought maybe this is it. It's the start of him turning around his season. But he then stalled on the grid sprint race 2. And then had that issue in the pits, didn't he, Jenny, in the feature race? How frustrated will he be?
I've never known anything like it. He's so quick as well, and I really thought, and I think when we did the first podcast as well, quite a few of us thought he could have done quite well in the championship, but he's had no luck at all. I can't believe how quick he is. He's only had 2 podiums this year. So unlucky. Yeah,
really difficult start to the season for him. Hopefully things will turn around in the second half of the season. Where do we stand, Lawrence, on this is a bit of a contentious topic, if you like, but obviously Christian Lundgaard picks up a 10-second stop-go penalty for his wheel coming off in the pits, and that was obviously from a mechanic. Should that be a 10-second stop-go penalty, or should it be a fine for an unsafe release? Where do you stand on it?
I think that probably should be a time penalty for the driver. I think incidents like that can't happen really. I think it was quite an uncomfortable one to watch, actually, to see a wheel flying about the pits like that. Safety is absolutely paramount, and it could have been very dangerous. Of course, it's not Lundgaard's fault, but those safety regulations have to be followed. So the punishment needs to be severe enough as well. And I think you win and you lose as a team in this sport, and I think it's only fair that there should be a penalty given out, as much as that's heartbreak for Lundgaard, who, like you say, really can't catch a break and has had all sorts of issues. Even last year at this same track, had a tyre failure, so really struggling. Hopefully all 4 wheels go on and stay on the wagon as they should do next time out.
Question time for our panel now then. So as always, we want to give you guys the opportunity to ask any questions you may have off the back of a race weekend, and we have had a couple. So at Jenny Rue Young on Instagram asked, why was Guanyu Zhou not penalised in qualifying when he set a P2 lap time after passing yellows in sector 3? Hannah, do you want to take that one?
I'm not entirely sure on that one. I was wondering whether we were going to ask about the red flag, because he ends up passing it moments before it's deployed. Unless they can, I'm assuming from the delta that they could show he reduced his speed enough. I think there's obviously a percentage that they have to reduce their speed by. And given the fact that he obviously had a purple sector 1, a green sector 2, he probably reduced it enough that it still ended up being a solid enough lap, but kept within the regulations. So that's probably why he wasn't penalised.
Yeah, and at WRL Russell asked, with the championship battle hotting up, in your opinion, who's your favourite for the title? Lawrence, we'll come to you for that one.
I think I may be leaning slightly towards Piastri at the moment. That's not something I thought I'd say, certainly not at the beginning of the season. I think even with the experience of Guanyu Zhou and Robert Schwartzman, Piastri is looking like the more complete driver, as we've mentioned, and he seems to be building in his momentum and building in his experience, of course. So I think I'd just have to edge it to Piastri at the moment, but Zhou and Schwartzman are also so quick, and they do have that experience of previous seasons to draw on. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them come back really strong as well.
Yeah, of course, it's wide open, isn't it? And we're starting to see a gap between the top 5 and the rest of the field. There's a 20-point gap in between Yuri Vips in 5th and Teo Pourchaire in 6th. Obviously, as we said at the beginning of the show, we're halfway through the season now. Are we looking at it simply being Piastri, Zhou, Schwartzman, Ticktum, Vips as the title contenders? Or do you think that more drivers, Teo Pourchaire downwards, can get themselves back into title contention, Jenny?
I think if you can have a really strong weekend, it'll definitely help. But I think there's drivers that should be a bit higher up, like you said, Porsche, maybe Liam Lawson, like the ones that have had really good weekends, even like Verschoor. So I think if they can carry on, if Verschoor can carry on and have finished, is it 4 rounds left?
Yeah, 4 rounds left.
If he can have 4 more rounds like he did this weekend, I think he can put himself up.
As long as he has a drive. Fingers crossed. Crossed. Lawrence, do you think it's between those 5, or do you think anyone else can push towards the title?
It is looking like those 5, but I think, like we've said, it only takes 1 round for somebody else to join that group, and equally for someone to drop entirely out of it as well. We've seen the speed of the likes of Pourchaire and Lawson, so I think those 5 are definitely the strongest so far this season. I imagine maybe the likes of Pourchaire moving up to join that group, but I can't see him quite overhauling such a gap, as much as I'd love to be proved wrong, of course. So I think it is probably between those 5.
And Hannah, I remember a couple of podcasts, well, it was after the second round, I think it was after Monaco, and friend of the show and Formula 2 commentator this weekend, Harry Benjamin, I think was saying that, it's a long way for Robert Schwartzman to come back, even though it is quite early on in the season. It is, we've seen how quickly he's got himself back into contention. Is that the same for other drivers? We're 2 rounds further on now, and who's your favourite to win the title this season?
For me, I think it's an interesting one looking at the championship battles. I would say top 5, I think, are most likely to be the contenders. I don't think it's maybe the same situation that we saw last year where we had, I think it was 6 or 7, possibly even 8 heading into the final weekend in Abu Dhabi within the title fight. I don't think it's going to be this way this time round. There's just been too much inconsistency or difficult weekends. I'd say Piastri, Zhou, Schwartzman, Ticktum, Vips, Pourchaire maybe, but I don't know how much, to be honest. I think it was a miracle that he was even racing this weekend. Had he missed this weekend due to the injury with his arm, I don't think he'd have been in the title fight. But I'd say the only other driver, maybe Liam Lawson. I expect if he can have a solid run, I think obviously he had the disqualification. Had he not had the disqualification, he would have been up there in the fight already. And I think maybe would have had an impact throughout the rest of the Monaco weekend, and possibly into Baku, that kind of sense of morale for him. So I would say keep an eye on him, and obviously Yuri Vips and the other high tech have been incredibly promising. And Felipe Drugovich, because I was expecting more. I feel a little bit underwhelmed compared to what he did in the MP last year, but I would say overall it is likely to be those 5. I can see it probably going down to the final race the same way it did last year, and I think I'm waiting to see who has the kind of Sonoda-esque bolt out the blue out of nowhere, kind of just suddenly bumps themselves up the leaderboard. And I would say Ticktum's the one. I would say of all of them, I would back Piastri because I do think he is by the more complete driver, but I'm going to say Ticktum simply because I think he just has that outright speed and he's gunning for a win. He just wants one at this point, and I think once we end up after Monza, we'll have a better idea of who's still in the championship fight.
Don't write anyone off. Anything can happen in Formula 2. We all know that. Okay, so a quick word on our Formula 2 graduates in Formula 1. 4 races since the last time we spoke about them. 1 in France, 2 races in Austria, and then the British Grand Prix, obviously, this weekend. How would you assess Mick Schumacher's performance over the last few races, Lawrence?
I think it's been good. It's one of those where it's really difficult to assess when he's in that Haas car, which has been, relative to the rest of the field, really quite uncompetitive, and that's one of the things we like about F2 so much, that it is a little bit easier to make those direct driver comparisons. I think it's just a real case of building experience for him this year in a Formula 1 car. I think he has been building that. He has generally had the upper hand over his teammate Mazepin, but he's also had the odd instant here and there. I think it was qualifying in Monaco. where he sent the car into the barriers, leading to a very hefty repair bill for the team. But I think as he builds that experience going through to next year, I think we should see a lot more from Mick. I think the way he had a season in F2 to build that experience, then the next season where he looked far more complete, I'm expecting him to do a similar thing and to really mature in this first year of F1.
Always does well in his second season, of course, or has done historically in junior categories. How would you rate Yuki Tsunoda's performances since the last time we spoke, Jenny?
I think he's starting to iron out his mistakes that he was making, and he's getting a little bit closer to Gasly. I think he's doing what he did in F2, like he's just starting to come into his own a little bit more, starting to seem a little bit more comfortable. So I think get to the end of the season, he could be maybe not matching Gasly, because I really like Gasly, but I think he can be really, really close.
Yeah, definitely had, as you say, more promising and less mistakes in the last few weekends, hasn't he? So good progress for him. And Hannah, Nikita Mazepin's progress?
I'd say this weekend in Silverstone was probably more difficult than maybe some of the other weekends. I think for him, probably the biggest thing is just getting the car to the line. If you're not competitive, trying to keep relatively out of trouble. I think for him, he's had a couple of tussles with his teammates. We saw in sprint qualifying, him getting spun around. It's those kind of things that he maybe needs to avoid, but it's very difficult to measure their performance. So for him, as long as he gets it to the end of the race, that is achievement enough to get to an end of Formula One, considering all the drama that happens up and down the grid. It'll just be interesting to see whether his performances relative to Mick Schumacher can improve, because at the moment he is still a fair few seconds off him in the race. And I just think that qualifying, he needs to out-qualify Schumacher at some point, probably in the next couple of races, just to be able to say, I've done it. It's a hurdle. It's the hardest thing, especially being a back marker. The only person you can compare them to is your teammate. And unfortunately for him, Schumacher is outperforming him at the moment.
Hungary, Spa and Zandvoort, all races in Formula One before Formula 2 rejoins the Formula One calendar for Monza. So we wish our graduates the best of luck for those races. Coming back to Formula 2 though, who was your driver of the weekends? Jenny?
Piastri.
Oscar Piastri for Jenny. Lawrence?
I think I'm leaning towards Dan Ticktum. I think those podiums that he took really significant, and especially in front of his home crowd. I think that was a really good moment for him to deliver, and a bit more of a clean weekend than in previous weekends.
Absolutely. And Hannah?
I want to pick three, but I'll go for one. I'll go for Richard Verschoor. I think as much as the other two, we know they're consistently at the front, but Verschoor this weekend was like a pocket rocket. And I think for him overall, it's maybe shown that maturity. And as Jenny mentioned earlier with the situation with MP, he's got the most difficult situation of every driver on the grid. And to be able to come in and put performances like that, kudos to him.
Yeah, brilliant weekend for Richard Verschoor. We asked you guys on Twitter and on Instagram who your driver of the weekend was. And you guys voted Oscar Piastri as your driver of the weekend. So congratulations to Oscar. And obviously our championship leader now. So let's see if he can maintain that lead for the rest of the season. But unfortunately, that's all we've got time for today. So Hannah, Jenny, Lawrence, thank you so much for your company on today's show. And thank you to you guys at home as well. If you've enjoyed the show, please make sure you give it a like. Let us know what you thought in the comments section below. And please subscribe if you wanted to have access to more exclusive interviews, track guides, and of course, more of the F2 show. If you have any questions, please get in contact with us on social media. You can find all the links to those in the description below. But until Monza, from all of us here at Inside F2, we'll see you next time.